I'm going to share some words with you from God's holy book, and we know that these are true and not to be misconstrued. From Psalm 1, either on page 489 in your Pew Bible or page 463. Please turn if you would like. Psalm 1, the two ways. Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or take the paths that sinners tread, or sit in the seat of scoffers. But their delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law they meditate day and night. They are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in its season, and their leaves do not wither. In all that they do, they prosper. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked shall perish. Thanks be to God.
We continue this week in reading from James's letter to the early church. We read in chapter 3, beginning with verse 1. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is perfect, able to keep the whole body in check with the bridle. But if we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships. Though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also, the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species, but no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives, or a grapevine figs? No more can salt water yield fresh. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. In our text for today, James grapples with the power of words. The power of words over us to change relationships, change lives. Oftentimes, the power of words to tear down and to destroy as opposed to build up. James tells us in our text for today that words used sparingly, words used carefully, can be tools that are used for productive use. Words that can be used to teach and to tell, to instruct and to inspire, to encourage and to enable. Words that need to be controlled like we control the toothpaste coming out of the tube, like the children demonstrated, that a little sometimes is enough. James talks about the use of words in a reckless way, sometimes even a malicious way. These words can be used more like implements of mass destruction to sow deceit and to despair and to tear down. Words that even if they are truthful, if used in the wrong way, as we did when the children yelled out fire, or when we gossip, words that can be truthful but misconstrued or intentionally taken out of context for ill. James challenges us to use our words carefully. He says, tame your tongues. Tame your tongues. And that is quite a challenge to us this day, to us who live in a world where instantaneous global communication, James says, talk less. Talk less. To us who live in a world that revolves around and encourages spontaneous outbursts of unfiltered passion, James says, exercise some control. Exercise control. And to Christians who are trying to remain relevant in a conversation that we don't feel we're even a part of anymore, James says, speak in ways that befit brothers and sisters in Christ, people made in the image of God. James himself doubts whether it is possible for us to practice what he preaches, that is, to control our words. He says in verse 8, no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. And we don't have to look too far to see how true that is in our culture today, with all of the shaming and the bullying and the boasting and the criticizing and the lying and the gossiping and the judging and the belittling. Our world is full of the misuse of words. James describes the tongue as being restless. It's restless, it's ready. It's as if we're twitching. We're just twitching and ready to have those words come out of our mouths, to say those things. And we have to wonder, why is it that we do that? Why are we so ready and eager to do that? Because, we even knowing that our words can be used to poison relationships and whole communities, whole congregations, we still do it anyway. We're not even reluctant about it sometimes. We're ready, we're restless. It's easy for us to do. And you have to ask yourselves, why is that? Well, one reason is because we are using our words to draw attention to ourselves. We assert our authority and our superiority over others by putting them down or in their place, or telling them what's good for them, which is arrogant and presumptuous on the part of people who sometimes don't know what their own place is or what's even good for them. Another thing we do is to deflect from ourselves, to deflect the attention from ourselves. We criticize other people so that people will hopefully not see our own failures and our own places where we need to improve and where we could be subject to criticism. And we use those words, we eagerly jump in because we are trying to maintain control over all of that conversation, maintain control over the worlds that we create in our own minds of who we are, that is built on our desires and our anxieties and our fears, and the mortar that holds that world together, that we construct on the foundation of our fears and our anxieties and our desires, is what? Exaggeration, boasting, little fibs, white lies, the kind of things that we say that aren't intended to be untruthful. But we're trying to maintain this world of ourselves that we've created. And yes, we are eager to use words for ill, for those kinds of reasons. No one is without sin in this regard. Not one. I do it. I hear myself talking to my children and I say, "What are you saying?" And yet I keep saying it. I do it with you. I say things that I think are true or should be true, and I hear myself saying it, and I wonder, "Melanie, what are you saying?" And yet we still keep talking. James says in verse 9, with the same mouth, we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. And he says, my brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. This ought not to be so. It doesn't have to be this way. He uses imagery of springs of water from which come both fresh water and salt water, grapevines that can't bear figs, true fruit that comes from true vines. And he's suggesting that despite the fact that we are stained by sin, that it pervades us and it makes us restless and ready to use words to destroy, we are nevertheless made in the image of God. We are created, we are called, we are capable of reflecting the love that we have received through God's grace and God's mercy from a transformed heart. James is teaching, from a transformed heart, we should be able to speak the kind of truth and love that builds up instead of tears down. And so the question that we have today is, how are we to do that? How are we to control our words, to tame our tongues? And in the other verses of our passage for today, James suggests three things that we can do. The first is, if we want to tame our tongues, we need to talk less. We need to talk less. James says in verse 1, not many of you should become teachers, the teaching elder reads, for today. For you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. All of us, whether we are employed as teachers, whether we are called as teachers, whether we are teaching the next generation, whether we are sharing our knowledge with our friends and our neighbors and our co-workers, all of us tend to think that we know more than we actually do. It's true. We think we know more than we actually do. And aren't we inclined to want to share the benefit of our knowledge with other people? It's what we do. We say things that we think are factual in an effort to be helpful, or maybe to be clever, or to just be in on the conversation. Speaking about music as if I knew what it was about to the choir. And when we do that, Here comes the truth, dragging behind us, and sometimes it gets wrapped up in the wheels with the truth. It's human nature to let our mouths flap. And when our mouths flap, we are prone to make mistakes. Not just one or two, but as James says, many mistakes. He says, for all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is perfect. And of course, we are none of us perfect. But we're also not experts, and we shouldn't be holding ourselves out as experts, trying to teach people things that we have no business trying to teach them, things that we don't ourselves know. And I, again, include myself in this category. None is without sin. We should be confining ourselves, talking less, confining ourselves to the things that we know. Because if we are not leading people to greater understanding and insight, we are leading them astray. So that's the first thing, talk less. And some of you are saying, well, they should just end the sermon right there. But he has two more points. If we want to tame our tongues, exercise control over what we say. We need to exercise some restraint over what we say. James says, if we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships, though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. I know nothing about horses or ships, but I will proceed anyway. A bit is a small device that we know is in the horse's mouth and controls its movement. It is a device, small device, for guiding a very large animal over sometimes unfamiliar and irregular terrain. Likewise, a rudder, the small device that guides the path of the ship, that navigates a vessel through storms and winds that are unexpected. And so James uses these two images of the need for us to control the small device that we have in our mouth so that we do not cause more damage. And I ask, what discipline do we have for doing that? What guides us in the operation of this small device? What rules do we have? And of course, I'm holding the rule book. This is the guidance that we have as disciples, the discipline that we need for controlling our speech. And yet, we so often fail to follow those rules. Perhaps we would do well to do what some of our civic organizations do, which is to put them on a piece of paper or recite them at the beginning of every meeting like the Rotary Club does. Who knows what the four-way test is? Is it truth? Is it fair to all involved? Does it build goodwill and better friendships? That's the last one. I'm not in Rotary either, so I shouldn't pretend to know this. Will it be beneficial to all concerned? I had Mr. Ruta help us out with that this morning because he is in Rotary. Those are the four tests. They say it at every meeting. Perhaps we would do well to do the same in controlling our speech. Is it true? Is it fair? Does it build goodwill and friendships? Is it beneficial to all? Talk less, control what we do say. If we want to tame our tongues, we also need to be careful with the words that are especially dangerous so that we do not use them recklessly. James says in verse 5, how great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. We know that in the church our speech is often reckless, sometimes even malicious. As we talked during the children's message, even truthful statements like the fact that there is a fire in the sanctuary, the way that it is said or expressed can be used in a reckless way, or to have a phrase that we let go at one end of the choir and it makes it all the way through to the end. That's a reckless thing to do. That's called gossip. Once those words are out of our mouths, we have lost control of those words. There's no opportunity to recall them to their original context, to explore what the inflection or the intention was when they were first uttered. We have a risk that they are going to become distorted or manipulated for other purposes. There is a sense in all of this that it is sometimes that there are some words that we need to maintain even more control, and James talks about them as being small flames that can start large forest fires. I worked for 3 summers as a forest fire lookout. That was my job to pay for college. And I happened to dispatch at one of the lookouts on the edge of an more urban area. So the rural fire department was part of my dispatching. So when I would call in a smoke that I had spotted, northeast, Lookout Mountain, 10-8. Go ahead, Lookout Mountain. I've got a fire in Indian River County, section 36, town, whatever, range, whatever, and they'd go, okay, and so they'd start dispatching from the forest fire end. I was also tied in, however, to the rural fire department, which is the 911. So a landowner, if it was a fire that was caused by a intentionally lit brush fire of some sort, they had the ability to call in on their phone to call for 911 assistance. And part of the game, if you're on that edge, is to see if you can beat the landowner to calling in their own fire. And you'd think, well, how could that be? They've got their phone. They should be able to do it faster. They're right there. Just call it. Not if they didn't get a permit for that burn. Not if they did it in a place where it should not have been started. Not if they didn't put a fire line around it, dug with a bulldozer or something that's going to break the fire if it gets out of control. Not if they don't have adequate suppression with water or other resources. And so there is a reluctance on people who know that they have been reckless to draw attention to their own mistake. And yet that is what we need to be thinking about when we play with words in the way that people start small fires they think they can control, and they get out of control. When we use those kind of words, we need to be thinking, do I have a permit? Do I have a permit to say this? Am I licensed? Am I authorized? Do I have authority to say this? If I'm going to say it, am I doing it in the right place so that I minimize the damage or the potential for harm? If it gets bigger than I had anticipated, do I have the resources, a bulldozer, to make a fire break, to stop it from getting worse? Do I have the ability to pour water on it or to throw dirt on it, to suppress it? And do I have the humility to pick the phone up and call 911 and say, I made a mistake, send help? We need to be handling some of our words with that kind of caution. Small fires that we start that can get out of control. James says if we want the world to listen to us, we need to be more mindful of the words that we use and the way that we use those words. We need to tame our tongues, speak less, control what we say, be careful with what we say. We can control our speech to build up instead of tear down. It requires constant attention. We are capable of taming our tongues.